Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. We got Terrence Howard versus Neil deGrasse Tyson. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is staying in his element right now. That's the big thing. When Neil deGrasse Tyson steps into gender and biology and all of that virtue signaling nonsense that he talks about, you don't want to hear a word he has to say. And it almost soured me on him completely as a person. But hearing his response to Terrence Howard, I'm like, okay, he's back in his groove. The stuff that he's actually the person to hear talk about this topic of science, right? So let's get into this. He brought receipts. Terrence Howard said a lot of things on Joe Rogan's podcast in that little blip of when he talks about Neil deGrasse Tyson, but Neil deGrasse Tyson brought the receipts. He actually has the thing that he was writing all the red on that Terrence Howard brings up. He actually has that still. The 36 pages, he has all of that still. He has his exact wording, and it's not quite the way Terrence is putting it. Terrence is putting it like as if there was some conspiracy against him, and I can completely see how there could be a conspiracy against someone who's about to break the mold of something. There's a lot of incentive to keep things the way they are, but Neil deGrasse Tyson, his side of the story has surfaced. Let's get into it. Don't forget about the new channel, Coach Colin Media. Check it out. We have videos all day long on this channel. If you like political stuff, if you're into conservative media, this is the channel for you to be subscribed to. There is a link in the description. Let's start this off, though, with a little bit from Neil deGrasse Tyson and what he has to say in regards to Terrence Howard. Let's start it right here.
By the way, was published.
No. You got that double speed going, as I always do. No, it's normal. Wow, he just sounds really fast. Let's go.
In a peer-reviewed journal. Crazy idea. The platform to be accepted for the ideas is not social media. It is not Joe Rogan. It is not my podcast. It is research journals where attention can be given on a level that at the end of the day offers no higher respect for your energy and intellect than by declaring that what's in it is either right or wrong or worthy of publication or not. I wanted to post this to my website.
Interesting. So you just, this calling out Joe Rogan right there. It's not social media, which is all true. But I mean, if you're going to be on a platform, it's going to be Joe Rogan. It's going to be the biggest one. That's going to spread throughout social media. Terrence isn't really responsible for that, but I understand what Neil is saying. And again, because of what Neil has said in regards to all the other stuff that he touches on, I'm a little soured on him, but we're still going to hear him out because why wouldn't we? We're not just going to hear out Terrence Howard and completely ignore Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about his work. But let's hear what Terrence Howard actually had to say about Neil deGrasse Tyson and their clashing of the minds, so to speak. I'm also going to pause this after 2 minutes. I'm going to skip over all the stuff about him detoxing his body and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just going to get to the straight goods of him and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Let's go.
There are no straight lines.
Right.
So I reached out to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I saw him at an event up front, at Fox. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. I would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you. And it was only 36 pages. It was a treatise. And I told him it was controversial. And I sent him over the 36-page thing that had the wave conjugations in it. But I started it off with 1 × 1 = 2. And he went in on my treatise, redlined everything. He attack that I had talked about Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and John Keeley and Tesla as the people that I looked up to. Mm-hmm. He attacked them, but then he started attacking, the 1 × 1 = 2.
How did he attack them?
Oh, he was because I asked him. I said under what conditions? I said it's illogical where the square root of a number added to itself will equal more than that number squared. But that's what happens with the square root of 2. That's what happens with most of the numbers. I was like, how is it that multiplication if it means to make more and increase in number, how is 1 times 1 equaling 1 part of the multiplication table? Now, I understand it if you're seeing it one time.
Right.
But we call that once. But the moment that you add the times in there, that multiplicative indicator, that means there's more than 1. So now each equation is supposed to be balanced. That equal sign is supposed to show that there's a balance between these 2 numbers over here and a balance on this 1 over here. What happened to the other 1 in this equation? It didn't equate. And then I took the square root of that number. I took the square root of 2. Because all this started in 3rd grade. I was arguing with my teacher because we're talking about the square root of 100. Oh, my God.
So your phone?
Yeah, that's my detox thing.
That's where they talk about the whole detox thing. He's taken whatever essential oils. But, hearing what Neil deGrasse Tyson had to say, it's very, very interesting. Again, I'm just going to skip over all of this stuff where they're just kind of talking back and forth. But hearing what he had to say was very interesting. And I don't know whose side I'm on with this whole thing. I mean, Neil speaks his piece, very well. Neil deGrasse Tyson is not just a scientist, but he's a guy who actually has a voice for radio. So he speaks well. But the only question is, and let's go back to this clip again, is he trying to silence somebody who potentially has this wild new science because there is incentive to keep things the way they are? I'm not sure on this. This is the part of Neil deGrasse Tyson where I don't know if he has those same type of motives. When I hear him talk about gender, I'm like, oh, this guy's bought and paid for. But I guess you being bought and paid for doesn't go away when you're talking about this science or that science, or I don't know. Let's get into it here.
True shit on he was like, well, Tesla stuff worked, but Tesla was never really respected and out there, and I guess he wanted me to support Bohr or Schringer or Feynman or any of those people. And I'm looking at the Feynman diagrams. I'm like, you made all these things up. You're basically doing the Mr. Spock thing. If you want to find an answer to something, then you cancel out all the possibilities, all other possibilities, and you root it down to one thing. So that means going through the whole universe to answer one question. And that's the problem with probability. That's the problem with Heisenberg uncertainty. That's the problem with Schrodinger. All of those were just these probabilities because they had taken the ether out. They forgot the electromagnetic wave. Mm-hmm. It had to have a medium in which it followed on. It had to have something in which it was moving on.
They don't exist in isolation.
No, they do not. And it cannot be the cause of its own action. An effect can never be the cause of the action. The chicken cannot come the egg cannot come before the chicken. The chicken has to be there first in order to lay it. It has to mate. And what Einstein left out was the equal and opposite of magnetism. So back to Neil deGrasse, when he wrote his response to my paper, and he said, if you have any other questions, you're going to have to see somebody else, and he wouldn't take my calls anymore. I was like, okay. So I wrote the book based off of those responses, and I reached out to another guy, Dr. David Tong.
But that would be very, very interesting that would be his take as a public educator, that he wouldn't want to talk to you anymore.
The reason I wanted to talk to him was because of his show, The Cosmos, that he was doing after that incredible guy, Carl Sagan did. Mm-hmm. The very first episode he had was talking about Giordano Bruno. Mm-hmm. And he said that Giordano Bruno was looking for that grand unified field equation, and maybe one day somebody is going to do it. And when they do it, it's going to change the world. And I'm like, dude, I've done it. I've got it here. He attacked it with such vitriol that I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to walk away from this. Dr. David Tong from Cambridge, a professor at Cambridge, did a video on physics of the world, and he said it's all a lie. And he explained that there was these 16 fields, that everything that they had taught was this, and they gave the best understanding and interpretation that they had of it. But it was all a lie because they didn't understand how it worked. Why? Because the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887, where they were trying to define the ether or the earth in this etheric space. Problem was they kept with Newtonian laws, so they thought the ether didn't move. They thought it was still. But there was another guy, Larmor, that did it in early 1800s, and he went off of Thomas Young, who influenced the Fresnel lens, influenced Fresnel, came up with the Fresnel lens. But he talked about a moving ether that had opposing vortices. So I didn't learn all of this stuff until I was getting ready to have conversations with people, because I was looking, where has this work been done? But if you look at Giordano Bruno's work, it looks a lot like my stuff. But he still had straight lines, and I think he put those straight lines in there to appease the church.
Oh, wow.
So that he wouldn't get killed.
Oh, my God.
And they still killed him. They hung him upside down in 1600, the Catholic Church. 1599, hung him upside down in a stake and set him on.
So that is the end of him talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson directly. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to switch over to Neil deGrasse Tyson now. But to say that he responded with vitriol and that he was very shunning of him, when you hear Terrence Howard talk about that, I can kind of believe it because, I've already had my mind a little poisoned by the way Neil deGrasse Tyson has been talking in the public eye as of recently. He's been talking a lot of nonsense when it comes to gender and whatnot. But when he actually reads what he wrote, not him retelling the story, when he's reading what he wrote, I don't know, guys. I really don't know. Let's go to the first clip. What do I got here? Let's go to 420. Nice. Right here.
So I lead off by saying, this is an ambitious work that is a clear indication of a restless, active mind. Within these pages, however, there are many assumptions and statements that are underinformed, misinformed, or simply false, thereby compromising or nullifying many of the subsequent conclusions you have drawn. That's exactly what should happen in a peer review, out of respect for one another's intellect. It opens with a quote from Terrence. It can never occur that the square root of a given number, when added to itself, is greater than the initial number squared, for that would expose a loose thread within the fabric of our understanding, a loose thread capable of unraveling the very ground rules of mathematics. That's a bold statement. So then I just say, this opening thesis is false. There are plenty of examples of this that have escaped your attention. His statement is shown to be false for every number that's less than 1 and greater than 0. For example, the square root of 0.64 is 0.8. 0.8 is bigger than 0.64, and it's a larger number than the original. And 0.64 squared equals 0.4096, a smaller number than the original. To the extent that the next 35 pages depends on your stated thesis, this fact undermines your claims and assumptions and conclusions. It's not about feelings here. It's about objective reality. So at the time, I considered Terrence a strong acquaintance. Then we hung out a bit and had much exchange. We haven't spoken much since then. But go to page 2, and in here, he mentions people who he declares were persecuted because their vision exceeded the myopic view of their contemporaries. And he mentions Walter Russell, Nikola Tesla, John Keeley, and many, many more. Regarding your list of people who have made brave sacrifices, I note that to be a genius is to be misunderstood, but to be misunderstood is not to be a genius. The work of Russell, Walter Russell, has eluded any experimental support, and the work of Keeley is generally not reproducible. Science is about reproducibility. I can have the most brilliant, crazy, fun idea ever, and if I perform an experiment and no one else can duplicate that experiment, it belongs in the trash heap. It's me in my own world, thinking I have landed on an objective truth, when in fact I haven't. That's how science works, the reproducibility of results. As for the work of Tesla, much of it had very real value to physics and our understanding of electromagnetism. And that value is duly recognized by my community in the naming of a unit of electromagnetism after him. You can't get more badass than having a unit named after you. Newton has a unit named after him. For example, the metric unit of force is a Newton. Much of the rest of his work was fringe and unrealized, either for violating known laws of physics or for being simply impractical. Just because you do some good stuff doesn't mean everything you ever did is going to be great. I will further affirm that just because an idea sounds crazy doesn't make it wrong. The system of research and publications in peer-reviewed journals has the capacity to spot crazy but true ideas, provided they're supporting by compelling arguments, and ultimately supported by experiments and observations. Newton's laws, Einstein's relativity, quantum physics were all revolutionary ideas that appeared in peer-review settings or journals. Meanwhile, most of the work of Russell and Keeley had no such success with their ideas. So I think on Rogan, Terrence said that I trashed those three researchers.
It's very interesting stuff. So he's basically calling out a whole lot of stuff, right? And you're hearing his actual words. You're hearing what he's actually saying. And it's not quite the way that Terrence laid it out. Terrence kind of put it like as if there was this really shutting down. And there kind of was, but not really, because the guy's a scientist. So he's kind of going to speak in this way. I think that's false. You know, if we're in a realm of emotions and feelings and caring about each other's feelings, maybe you don't want to just say it that point blank. You want to say, well, maybe you should consider. But when you're a scientist and you're actually reading a scientific paper, because Terrence wrote a scientific paper, you know, you can't, you know, as many people think he's just crazy. He wrote something. And Neil deGrasse Tyson took it very seriously. So if you're going to take it seriously, you're going to have to do it the same way you would do anybody else's. It kind of seems like he did it like that. So let's get into the next clip here. Let's jump in, hear what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say.
Changing so quickly, and so is everything around us. Unfortunately, we have chosen to remain handcuffed to antiquated and obsolete beliefs. We have put an enormous amount of faith into the methods and practices of old that are as dead today as the men who propagated the notion.
Just to tell you, that is actually Terrence Howard's words. Anything that's black is Terrence. Anything that's red is Neil. Sorry, just wanted to clarify that.
That the world was flat. So I say here, regarding your world was flat reference, it's not widely appreciated that the idea of a flat earth predates the introduction and development of the methods and tools of science as we practice them today. Those processes date back to around 1600, coincident with the invention of the microscope and telescope. Before then, truths were whatever seemed right to the senses. Afterwards, and to this day, truth was whatever the verified data obtained by your instruments forced you to believe if your senses otherwise contradicted the data. This fact means that there's no such misunderstanding on the scale of the flat earth in the era of modern science.
Okay, so that's him. He is shooing away. The thing is, if you're wrong about many things in a paper, you're going to have somebody, it's going to feel like they're attacking you, right? But here's the thing. When they brought up Nikola Tesla, the thing about Tesla is, you know, and I'm sure I, like so many other people, have looked into him deeply because he's such a interesting figure, right? So intelligent. But there was a part of Tesla who really believed in Eastern philosophy, right? Terrence also engages in that as well. Now, that would be the part where a regular scientist like Neil deGrasse Tyson would consider that fringe. He wouldn't look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's widely accepted, because it's not. Like, you know, Eastern wisdom, Eastern philosophy in science is not widely accepted. But Tesla felt that certain things could happen based on this Eastern philosophy. I remember reading about Tesla talking about just meditation, and he was talking about a wire, and he would in meditation, he was talking about meditation, which is more of an Eastern thing, right? And he was applying science to it. And he was talking about how a wire needs to be straight, so people actually shouldn't sit in lotus position. They should actually just sit the way that I'm sitting now, because that's the best way to have energy flow through. It's just little things like that where he would kind of intertwine the two. And if you go to Eastern wisdom and you say, hey, you should just sit in a chair like this, they'll be like, no, lotus position. That's how we do it. right? And there's a lot of things that Tesla and Terrence now will take into mainstream science and say, hey, it actually works like this. I had the thought in my head when I was in the womb. And they're just like, no. Which, it kind of makes sense when you want to keep things reproducible, I don't know. Anyways, guys, let's get into this last clip. Neil deGrasse Tyson saying what's on his mind, but more so saying what's on the paper. That's a big thing he has going on there. A lot of red on it, though.
Note that from this work, Terrence produces art, sculptural art, which I find to be intriguing, even beautiful. To me, more intriguing than beautiful, because you got to look at it and you keep looking at it. Like, what is that? And what's going on there? I just want to read you my ending comments here. I could not follow the reasoning on these last few pages, but the illustrations that derive from them are beautiful, regardless of how they were derived. My notes have been strongly critical of your reasoning and conclusions. I was candid and blunt out of respect for the energy you have clearly invested in this work. But if you're sure that you are still right and that I have completely misunderstood your thesis, then you will need to look for another person to evaluate what you have done and solicit their comments. In any case, like I say above, the images and illustrations in your final pages are beautiful works of art, unlike any I have seen. Best to you, Neil. So, in case people wanted to know what actually went down 8 years ago, just always be cautious of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You put in a little bit of work and you have an idea, and then you think your idea is right and that Einstein is wrong and Newton is wrong and that everybody's wrong and that all of modern astrophysicists are wrong. That's bold. That's bold. Audacious. Bodacious. When continental drift was proposed, it was like, what?
Then he starts talking about continental drift and the fact that you can't just say that South America and Africa fit together just because it looks like they do. You have to have a whole bunch of scientific backing for that. And then they found fossils on either side, and that kind of solidified that notion. He says it a lot better because he's Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I just wanted to let you guys know that last part. Now, you have to see, right? That was the last thing he said. Terrence kind of broke it down like as if he was just like, she shooed me away. He said he wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't take my calls. He basically just said, if you still think you're right, you're going to have to take it up with someone else, which Terrence did. He went to David Tong. And if you watch my other video, I'm going to make sure it links at the end. You will see that there's a video. The thumbnail says, Terrence Howard shunned with a picture of Neil deGrasse Tyson. And in that, I play a little bit of David Tong. And David Tong kind of has similar theories, but they're only similar because Terrence heard David Tong talk about them and then he started talking about them. Now, where Terrence is wrong, I'm pretty sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong if you watch the other video. But David actually talks about these fields being very fluid. Terrence says that he thinks that David Tong thought the fields just stay the same. It's very much not from what I remember in the video clip that I show. But there you go. Terrence, I don't know, man. Terrence didn't quite, I'm not going to say he wasn't honest, but he made it sound much worse than it was. Neil deGrasse Tyson just kind of did the science thing. He didn't really do the emotion thing in this whole, whatever you call that, grading. Almost like he's grading a paper. He didn't really go that hard, but he felt like Terrence was wrong on so many things. So it's going to feel that way regardless, especially when you're Terrence Howard and you've dedicated so much time and you've dedicated so much of yourself into this whole thing. And you've been working on it your whole life. You feel like you have everything wrapped up. You feel like you're going to rewrite history. And then some guy just comes along and says, this is false, this is wrong, this is wrong. You're going to feel like, he's just one of those guys. There's a conspiracy against him. I don't know. I'll still keep an open mind. There could be. Neil deGrasse Tyson could have got the call. Hey, shut it down. Click. Neil deGrasse Tyson was like, all right, red. Oh, this gentleman's so smart. He would have rewrote history. Can't have that. That's possible too. But I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm as much as I don't like Neil deGrasse Tyson and how he talks about gender and what he feels should be going on in boy and girl locker rooms and how we as people and parents should really stay out of it. I don't like that whole thing. I do think he's kind of on the more correct side in this whole thing. And I know there's a lot of you who think Terrence Howard is Jesus himself. I understand so many people, the first video I made, they're like, you just don't get it. You're not open. You don't know anything about this. I'm like, oh gosh, relax. Terrence Howard is not your savior. And if he is, I apologize. And, make a shrine. Send me a picture of the shrine that you make of Terrence Howard. But I think Neil deGrasse Tyson might be right about this. But Terrence could prove him wrong in the future. But this is exactly what I said about the last video. Sorry to point at you like that. But exactly what I said in the last video was that you need progress. Graham Hancock was completely wrong when he first got on Rogan. Everybody said he was wrong. Nobody would give him the time of day. And today he has a Netflix special. It's very informative. So many people are taking on his ideas. It's all making sense to thousands of people, hundreds of thousands even, many people who are in the archaeology community, because Graham made progress. He made progress year after year after year. Terrence has not made progress. And when he does, who knows? He might change everything. And like Tesla and like Newton, he might have a unit of measure named after him, the Terry. I would go with the Terry, not the Howard. You go with the Terry, 100%. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments of these two. Are they just bumping heads? Is Neil lying? Is Terrence crazy? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, helps the channel tremendously. And other than that, I'm out.